Everybody, welcome to the Hartford March for Science. I just have a couple of thank yous that I want to make to everybody who's made this happen today. First, Riverfront Recapture, whose beautiful park we're using today. Thank you very much. Thank you to everybody behind me, the wonderful speakers here who will be addressing to you. They're very busy and they've been so gracious as to take the time out of their day, and we're very appreciative for that. I would also like to thank all of the exhibitors whose tents are lining the plaza here. There are a number of very prominent scientific organizations here in the Hartford area, and the work they do is great, and we're very happy to have their support today. And yes, exactly. I would also like to thank all of the wonderful volunteers who are here today. This wouldn't be able to happen if not for all the awesome, enthusiastic, and passionate volunteers who are all over doing so many different tasks. Thank you to you guys. And then finally, I want to thank the crew who made this happen today. Elizabeth Moe, who is right here. She helped kickstart this and really launched all of our fundraising efforts. So without her, we wouldn't have been able to pay for anything that's here. Sarah Raskin, who is also here, and actually also organized the Women's March here in Connecticut. She brought an insight and she brought an enthusiasm without which we might not be standing here either. And then finally, Stephanie Baber-Pexel here, I want to give a very sincere thank you to. As much as I've been the guy who's been picking up the phone when the press calls, Steph, you have really been the powerhouse behind making this event happen today. This would not be here if it wasn't for you. Stephanie has done an astounding amount of work. Her dedication, her creativity, and her drive to communicate science are inspirational. And so everybody, please join me in thanking Stephanie. Sorry. Okay, and so that's all that I have for you. Thank you everybody for coming out. And so without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Lieutenant Governor Nancy Wyman, who will be giving us our opening speech for the event today.
Here we go. Thank you, Harrison.
Thank you, Harrison. Oh, let's just call him Dr. Harrison.
Not yet.
Not in a couple of weeks. But to all the organizers, thank you. To all of you, wow. This is fantastic. I could not believe the crowd out here today. People should be, I wish we had a plane that could fly over and show the pictures of everybody out here today, because that's what's really important. You know, I've never thought, I've been in government a long time, and I've been on this earth a long time. Who would have ever thought we would have to rally for science? Come on. But are we really surrounded by the experts? We are lucky because we are surrounded by the experts. What history will call a teachable moment. The rest of us call common sense. You know, we don't live in a rarefied air that some people might on Fifth Avenue or something. We have to deal with the asthma, the cardiovascular disease, and other respiratory illnesses caused by unchecked pollutions. We need to worry about high levels of lead in our drinking waters, how it got there, who would fix it, the impact on our children or our grandchildren. I have to tell you, it's wet up here. Anybody can stop, if the science can stop the rain, that would be good. Well, we're going to work at it in spite of everybody else. We're going to find a way. We all know that science is important, right? Is science important? Yeah. I want to thank all of you, the educators, the doctors, the researchers, the public health advocates, environmental leaders, legal minds, and so many others who came out today to explain again that science is real. Science is critical to the protections of the human health, human rights, and well-being of our planet. And to insist on the investments in science centers of excellence like the National Institute of Health and NOAA, because these are integral to public health and safety and to the lives of all of all the Americans. So thank you all for being here today. Please remember, it's not just today, it's every day that we need to speak out and fight for what we believe in. And we believe science is real. And we can't be silent on science. God bless you all, and thank you so very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, thank you, Lieutenant Governor Wyman. Our first speaker today is Dr. Joanne Berger-Sweeney, who is the president of Trinity College and professor of neuroscience. Welcome, Professor Berger-Sweeney.
Hello, everybody. Any of you know Nancy Wyman, and you know she wears really big shoes? I don't have really big shoes, so I'm standing on a platform so that I can see you all. Thank you for coming. You might ask, why am I here? And I will try and answer that for you over the next few minutes. I am here because I'm standing in solidarity here in Hartford with our friends and colleagues in Washington, D.C., and more than 425 other satellite marches around the world. I'm here because it's a great day for science. I'm Joanne Berger-Sweeney, and as you've heard, I am a scientist. I'm a neuroscientist, to be specific, and I'm also privileged to be president of Trinity College here in Hartford. So, once again, why am I here? I am here despite the fact that I grew up in a family of lawyers. They said to me, you can be anything you want to be. And if you want to be a scientist, we are going to support it. And so I was able to follow my passion as an undergraduate psychobiology major at Wellesley College. I have a master's in environmental health sciences from UC Berkeley. I have a PhD in neurotoxicology from Johns Hopkins University. I did a postdoctoral fellowship at the National Institute of Health in France, in Paris, and I also have received funding from the National Institutes of Health and the National Science Foundation, among others. So in some way, I am here because of incredible mentors and also because of the public funding that supported my scientific career, both institutionally and also through individual grants. And one of the products of that funding was the fact that I did proof of concept work for what is now one of the largest Alzheimer's drugs in the world. That's the kind of payoff you get when you invest in science. Now that I'm a college president, science is still in my bones. And in some ways, it's also in my heart. I'm married to a scientist, and so we have scientific conversations all the time. It has meant a great deal for me to be able to work on fundamental questions in neuroscience, how we learn, and that has helped to contribute to what happens in diseases like Alzheimer's disease and also some of my work in autism. Today, as a college president, I get to support the work of our faculty and encourage and mentor our wonderful students, many of whom are pursuing majors in neuroscience, some with Sarah Raskin, who was here, engineering, biochemistry, computer science, physics, and other science fields, as well as the liberal arts. As you know, science is a part of the liberal arts. In ancient Greece, science and math were amongst the subjects and skills considered essential for a free person in their civic life. It is still true today. To participate in society in an informed and effective way, one must possess quantitative skills, be able to interpret data, to reason quantitatively, and to understand basic scientific methods and major scientific ideas. We teach our students to conduct research, to analyze, to understand complex texts and problems, to identify patterns and connections, and to ask questions that no one has asked before. We teach them strategies to both work independently and also collaborating. If we succeed, we are instilling all of these lessons and skills in our students that we advance knowledge and make the world a better place. This work, and actually many of you, inspire me every day. And this march today inspires me to redouble personally my efforts to support science and to make it more inclusive and accessible to people in all parts of society. I was one of the only African Americans in my PhD class at Hopkins. I was the first African American woman to become a tenured full professor in biology at Wellesley College, where I taught. I was the first African American to be elected to the Council of the Society for Neuroscience. I am a member of AAAS, a fellow in that organization, and now I am the first African American and first woman to be the president of Trinity College. There were doors open to me that were closed to people who came before me. And now it's my responsibility to open doors for first-generation college students, for women in the field where they're woefully underrepresented, for people of color, and for those with limited financial resources. Science is not limited to the rich. When those doors are open, our world is one of rich learning and understanding. And today, more than ever, that's the world that we need. I value facts. I value data. I value observations. I value inquiry. I value the exchange of ideas, and I am a scientist. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Berger-Sweeney, for your words. You did remind me, actually, I forgot to make an announcement earlier. The American Association for the Advancement of Science is having a special today for one day only. You can join and become a year-long member for only $40, which includes a year-long subscription to Science Magazine. Also, we would love to see your photos and your videos that you take today. If you post them on social media, please use the hashtag ScienceMarchCT, okay? Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Bruce Liang, the Rainiac Distinguished Professor of Cardiovascular Biology and Medicine, as well as the Dean of the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. Dr. Liang?
Thank you, Harrison. Good afternoon. I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to speak on medical and science education and what it means for the health of our residents. As educators, we all need to commit to training future generations of medical scientists and biomedical researchers so we can maintain a leadership role in the world for medical science. At UConn Health alone, we are training over 600 physicians and dentists, and that's every year. And at any given time, we are working with over 1,000 scientists and scholars at UConn Health. We provide scholarship and stipends to enable students to become future valuable members of the society in caring for the sick and in bringing the latest science progress to patients' benefit. They are tomorrow's doctors and tomorrow's cures, as convincingly stated by the AAMC, which is the Association of American Medical Colleges. Like the previous speaker, I'm also a biomedical scientist myself. I'm a physician scientist, I'm a cardiologist. I can attest the critical importance of scientific knowledge to better the health outcome of our citizens. We live in a very exciting time where the distance between science and clinical medicine is getting shorter and the link ever more achievable. Science progress means hope for millions of Americans and their families affected by life-changing diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. Today, University of Connecticut School of Medicine, our physicians, our scientists, our colleagues in the School of Dental Medicine, and patients call on all of you to continue build upon the recent bipartisan support of NIH. Robust, reliable investment in scientific discovery is crucial to improve the health of patients, strengthen the economy in near and long term, and maintain United States' global preeminence in medical innovation. Thank you. Physicians and scientists at U.S. medical school and teaching hospitals such as UConn conduct more than half of all external research funded by NIH. At UConn, our scientists and physicians are supported by NIH in developing a new medication to treat patients with advanced heart failure. To also understand the genetics of patients with heart muscle disease known as cardiomyopathy, and this is done in collaboration with the Jackson Lab, which is located near the UConn Health School of Medicine, as well as genetics of patients who have normal or even high level of good cholesterol and yet are still at risk for having heart attacks. We are also growing new knee ligaments and limbs and develop a new vaccine to combat ovarian cancer and other forms of cancer. Science as a whole has resulted in a number of striking examples of success as a community of scientists. According to the most recent National Cancer Institute annual report, we now know that overall cancer incidence rates continue to decrease among men and remain stable among women between 1999 and 2013. So we still got some work to do in women afflicted with cancer. But the 5-year survival rates for all men and women for the most common types of cancer has increased from 50% in 1975 to 66% in 2012. Other examples include people battling high cholesterol. They can take statin, and as you know, statin, while lowering cholesterol effectively, can cause a body ache and myalgia or muscle pain. We now have a new medication for those individuals who cannot take statin and can take this new medication. Vaccines can now be administered to prevent hepatitis A, B, rotavirus, and the human papillomavirus as well. The nation invests less than $100 per person annually for all of the research conducted by and supported by NIH, yet the return on investment has been spectacular for all of us. This kind of economic development has made U.S. the world leaders in medical science but our stature may be slipping as other countries around the world have been increasing their public investment in research. Because research cannot be turned on and off like a spigot, there must be sustained and predictable government-supported growth so researchers can build on previous progress and investment. In closing, millions of Americans depend on science progress to provide hope in the face of potentially devastating diagnosis. At UConn and UConn Health, together with nation's medical schools and teaching hospital, we urge all of you to help us maintain the science infrastructure of hope. Our patients and all Americans deserve it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Liang. Everybody, please join me now in welcoming our State Senator Beth Bai of Connecticut's 5th District. Senator?
Wow, you guys are amazing. In the rain, I could not park. How about the rest of you? This is a good problem to have. Give yourselves a big hand, and I want to especially give the young people a hand, the parents who brought their children, the children who've come out. Young people, you are our future. Thank you for being here. My name is Beth Bai, and I understand that Kate made me a rain cap, so I'm going to put on my thinking cap before I speak. Thank you to the organizers. Today, all of you are a part of data, an experiment. They're counting you and counting people all over this country who are standing up today for science. So thank you for being part of this experiment. I'm going to start with, I think, some hard news and then move to positive news. Unfortunately, in 2017, in many ways, we're living in an age of deception. Our information systems have undergone tremendous change, which has opened up opportunity for bad, but it opens up opportunity for good. So we have to take the threats, but take advantage of those opportunities for good. Our citizens are subject to purposeful misinformation about science for corporate gain that threaten our very existence on this planet. And today we are saying no more. We face the slow but sure reduction of news sources that have at their core a mission of valid information for their customers. In the past, communities have shared vetted truths, and that more easily moved our public policy that was grounded in scientific research. Add to that reduction in the press corps the rise of anti-government, anti-regulation, anti-public health rhetoric that undermines public investments and basic protections for consumers and for our future. We have to say no more. Say it with me. No more. We have fewer reporters and more paid communication specialists spinning their truth to benefit their causes, which are too often profits. We need to speak up. We're not going to give it to them anymore. Ready? No more. You are here today to say, yes, science can unify us. We can work together and protect and promote science. You believe in the power of policy grounded in science. You believe in the power of environmental regulations that are there to protect our families and our future. You believe in the power of a public infrastructure that invests in research and implements policies grounded in this research. Scientific inquiry and innovation, as you heard Dr. Yang say, are two features of our state of Connecticut and our nation that make us great. We need to keep investing in science. You with me? Science is a huge job creator. When you heard Dr. Yang talk about the NIH sends money around our nation to our research institutions and supports our greatest scientists to protect our health. We must do all we can to make sure that researchers can keep discovering and keep supporting jobs for our next generation. So many of those little kids in the Science Museum, it's so cool to have the Science Center here because Connecticut's made an investment in that. And to see all those young children in there who love science. All children are scientists, and we need to support that. My background is as a child development researcher, and I can tell you it can be hard to get that research into our policy and our budget priorities. I want to talk about one area very briefly and let the next speaker get on, but James Heckman, who was an economist at the University of Chicago, started looking into the value of early childhood education and what that could mean for our culture. And looking at all that research, he discovered that there is between a 7% and a 13% return on investment if we support our youngest learners with high-quality early childhood. We are one of the only industrialized nations not to have a system. And he, as an economist, said, I'm just going to research this. And those savings aren't just, it's a 13% return on investment. It's children that get high-quality early childhood, who do better in school, who get better jobs, who graduate from college. It's their parents who can go to work and know their children are being well cared for, who can then take that next step themselves. This 7 to 13% is 17 to 13% because of improved lives for individuals. This is because of what we now know from science, that early brain. Babies' brains are so fragile and they offer such opportunity, but there's such risk. And that's what the scientists have taught us. But those early investments are critical. You'll hear all politicians say, we love early childhood, we want to invest in early childhood. But guess what? Over the past decade, we've been losing ground in these investments, despite the rhetoric. We need to rely on the science because other priorities prevail. Art Rolnick from the Federal Reserve is on just a crusade to tell communities, stop investing in stadiums, start investing in children. I actually love to go to a game as much as the next person. I love a baseball game. But those dollars have no return on investment. They don't invest in our future, whereas early childhood did. I did a little math. For that $71 million to build yard goat stadiums, Hartford could have had high-quality early childhood program for every child birth to age 5 for a year. An investment that would pay off for those families, for those children, and for the future of our great capital city. We need to build human capital through our investments. In addition, there'd be somewhere around 700 full-time jobs at $40,000 a year with the early childhood system. With the stadium, you have 300 part-time seasonal jobs. It's not building what we need to build. It's not building on science. It may be building on emotion, but we need to keep our scientists, to have Joanna Berger Sweeney here and listen to her, to have Dr. Yang and other scientists. These are the investments that we need to make. So that was just one example of saying that science matters and we need to stand up for science. So I want to thank you all for being here today. Let's go. No more, right? No more. Science matters.
Science matters.
Science matters.
Science matters.
Have fun.
So our next speaker is going to be Frederick Cohen. He is a professor of biology and environmental studies at Wesleyan University. Professor?
Thank you. Thank you. So my name is Fred Cohen. I'm a scientist. I'm a microbial ecologist at Wesleyan University. And I want to talk about science and infectious diseases and global change. So, reflecting on Earth Day, many of us can remember a time decades ago when our country broadly supported protection of the environment. We were motivated partly by human health, based on the science of the health dangers of polluted water and air. We passed with broad bipartisan support the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and partly motivated to save the non-human members of our planet, we supported the Endangered Species Act. Even then, 40 years ago, the science had shown that there was an alarming number of extinctions. Bipartisan support also brought us the EPA. Now, unfortunately, there is no bipartisan support for environmental protections, and certainly not for addressing climate change. So the problem is that we're inclined to ignore the inconvenient truths that Al Gore talked about from science about global warming. We seem quite willing to take a chance on hot, deadly summers and rising sea levels. Worrying about global change is for many of us like worrying about heart disease. So many of us, we don't worry about eating better, exercising better, sleeping better. On the other hand, there is a health issue that we all worry about. It's infectious disease. If somebody comes near us with a sneeze or a cough, we go nuts. And so I believe that our fears of infectious disease will be what reconnects us to science and protecting the environment. And this is because global warming and other environmental impacts are bringing nasty pathogens to us. So we should not think about global warming like it's heart disease. Rather, we should think about global warming like it's the plague. So here's the way to think about it. So science tells us about the impacts of global warming on infectious diseases. They're vectors of tropical diseases that are moving north and bringing their diseases with them. For example, there's a disfiguring parasitic disease called leishmaniasis that's already migrated from Mexico all the way through Texas and into Oklahoma. This tropical disease is now in the heartland of America. Also, mosquitoes, tropical mosquitoes and their vectors are moving northward. Zika is already in South Florida, and science shows that it is extremely likely to move northward, as will malaria, chikungunya, and dengue. So the thing is, it's not just global warming, and science has shown that there are all kinds of environmental impacts on animals that bring us infectious disease. So take deforestation. Through its effects on ticks and mosquitoes, deforestation is causing Lyme disease and West Nile virus in the U.S. And in West Africa, deforestation brought bats closer to villages and thereby the most recent outbreak of Ebola. Science has made a strong case that bushmeat hunting in Africa brought HIV to humanity about a century ago, and it looks like we are poised to see another pandemic coming out of bushmeat hunting. So science is showing that our environmental impacts are not just making us hotter and killing wild animals. Each way we disturb the Earth's wild creatures comes back to kill us through deadly pathogens. We might be willing to ignore all the other ways that environmental damage threatens human health and prosperity, but I believe that our fears of pathogens will direct our attention to environmental science and will help us mitigate our damage to the planet. So, to wrap up, we need science to understand our present impacts on the environment, to predict our future impacts, to avoid the worst outcomes, and to mitigate the unavoidable. We certainly can't afford to let the government shut down scientific research or to stifle communication about human impacts on the environment, or most importantly, I think, to discourage young people from entering science. So I'd like to implore you to support science in any way you can, by fostering science education in the public schools, demanding that the federal government support scientific research, and by persuading your friends and neighbors that science is necessary for our health and prosperity. All right, thank you.
So it is now my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Anis Chekbar, who is the director of the Breast Center at the Smilow Cancer Center at Yale New Haven. Welcome, Dr. Chekbar.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here and to see so many people. I mean, I can't even see where the crowd ends. And you know what that means, right? That means that we really care about science, and we understand that science is really important for everything that we're about, because all of us are part of one big family, and that family is called humanity. And we understand that science is really important to keeping humanity healthy. You see, I spend every day treating breast cancer patients. And I spend every day thinking about how we can do things better, how we can prevent cancer, how we can treat it better, how we can prevent side effects, and how we can make people live longer and healthier lives. And I do this not only because it's what my job is, but I do this because I'm part of a small family where my mother has breast cancer. And I'm part of a big family called humanity. So I want everybody to do this one thing. I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to say hello, and I want you to thank them for being here. And then I want you to turn to the person on the other side, and I want you to say hello, and I want you to tell them thank you for supporting science. And now that you've done that, I want you to realize two things. The first thing is that we're not alone. We are a very big group of people. And we can send a very strong message to our representatives. Those are the people who are supposed to represent us. That science matters, and that we want people to invest in our health, in our education, and in keeping our planet and our civilization healthy. And the second thing I want you to realize, which is more sobering, is that in those two people that you met, statistically, one of them will get cancer sometime during their lifetime. And so, it is incumbent upon us to think about how we can do better. Because right now, we are at the nexus of a point in time where we have the brain power, we have the technology, we are on the cusp of cutting-edge advances. We're figuring out how we can get your immune system to attack cancer. We're figuring out how we can personalize therapies to target them to individual genetic mutations. We're figuring out how to prevent cancer before it ever starts. Okay, that was the good news. Now for the bad news. The bad news is the NIH budget has been flat. And when you think about adjusted for inflation, it's actually been declining. So at a point in time when we are on the cusp of doing so much for so many, we need the investment in science. We need the investment in health science, in medical research, and we need to be funding education so that the young people who are here can be the future scientists and the future physicians, because they're going to be taking care of all of us. But the beauty of it is that now that there are so many people here raising so much awareness, you are sending a very powerful message to our State House all the way up to the White House that science matters, and we want an investment in science. Now, I realize that money is tight. I realize that there's only so many things you can invest in. But when you want to think about keeping humanity healthy, You know, we don't see polio anymore thanks to science. We're doing better and better every day thanks to science, but when we think about things that sometimes people think about, things like chemical weapons, when we think about addiction to drugs, guess what? Science is helping us with that too. So science helps us to understand what keeps us healthy, and that's really important because it's the only thing that binds us together as a family of humanity. Thank you so much for being here and showing your support and sending a strong message to our legislators.
We are going to welcome to the stage Philip Yeagle, who is the Deputy Editor of Science Advances and Professor Emeritus at the University of Connecticut. Professor?
Thanks very much. Wow, what a crowd. Terrific. And what fantastic signs. I wore mine, so. It was my first true research experience. During that long ago summer and fall, Professor Hargrove at St. Olaf College taught me not only the scientific underpinnings of my project, but also what it meant to be a scientist, including my first failures and my first success in research. It was the intoxication of the joy of discovery, however, that was most memorable. That joy was initially a private moment. I was seeing something no one else had ever seen. I couldn't hold it private for long, however. I camped outside my professor's office until he returned from class and then blubbered out the news. Under his guidance that afternoon, my incoherence gradually became coherence, enabling him to share my excitement. Little did I suspect that he was also teaching me that telling the story of my discovery was nearly as important as the discovery itself. As we march for science today, celebrate that joy of discovery that many of you know personally. Celebrate the blessing for the human condition that is scientific research. Celebrate the privilege that some of us have to participate. Celebrate the gifts from science to our society of evidence-based decision-making. Acknowledge also that it is our duty as scientists to tell our stories of discovery to the rest of humanity. After all, our fellow citizens, one way or another, enable us to do this important work. And further, let us revere facts established through painstaking research that are the foundation of human understanding. I come to you as a student of science, a teacher of science, a researcher, a senior administrator, and now an editor of Science Advances. Experience has taught me that scientific discovery is brought to us by a relatively small group of highly energized people cracking the boundaries of the unknown in countless dimensions, exploring on behalf of all of humanity. That exploration that is science is in service to the public. Some of us have been generously given the extraordinary opportunity to discover, yes, even to go where no one has gone before. We then have the obligation to tell others the stories of what we have discovered, a promise achieved in part through scientific publication. Telling that story has a second purpose, to open windows for other scientists to see ahead to yet more new discoveries. This second purpose represents a critical part of the scientific process. Science is exploration of ideas, sometimes initially suggested by others in papers. Science is testing and retesting of work done previously by other scientists. Publishing the story enables this testing. This process of simultaneously exploring new frontiers and verifying previous work, sometimes over a very long time, leads to new understandings and in particular to new facts. These facts take us as close to truth as science can get. And these facts are powerful. The facts extracted from well-designed and performed and properly replicated experiments reviewed by experts in the field and published in peer-reviewed journals are good for the ages. Facts do not deteriorate with age like we do. Facts remain constant for all of us to use responsibly. Interpretations of data may change, which may be confused with an unreliability of the facts. However, the scientific process is inherently designed to self-correct. And if the work is important, mistakes are corrected, and facts are the product. It is the accumulation of facts that leads to exciting new understandings of the world in which we live and of ourselves. These facts often emerge from a series of small advances from individual, seemingly unrelated research projects. The scientists responsible for that research publish their results in peer-reviewed journals, and other scientists can test those results and produce yet more of their own. What happens next is nothing short of amazing. Consider the countless number of heart attacks that have been prevented and consequently the number of lives that have been saved by statin drugs. That story began with basic science discoveries of the essential roles of cholesterol in the operation of the cells of our bodies. Concurrently, other scientists found that cholesterol in our blood could kill us. These seemingly disparate facts, each published as part of the stories of hundreds of individual investigations by dedicated scientists, stimulated yet other scientists to connect these facts in a stunning new way. The life-saving statins are the result. The scientific enterprise is a noble one. It exalts the human intellect and human creativity. Its stories of discovery are published so that they can be validated. The practice of science results in facts. And from those facts, new understandings emerge that should guide all of us in our public and private lives. Celebrate the joys of scientific discovery. Celebrate the blessings for humanity that come from science. Celebrate the fact-driven process of decision-making that science gifts to us as a society. Thank you for all coming out today.
That was wonderful. Thank you very much, Professor Yeagle. Our next speaker is going to be Jeffrey Townsend. He is an associate professor of biostatistics and associate professor of ecology and evolutionary biology at Yale University. Also host of So What Now America podcast. Jeffrey Townsend.
Well, it's great to be here. It's great to see you all here. I hope you're all having a good time thinking about this. I'm here to talk about getting active for science. You all want to get active for science? There are a lot of ways to get active for science. I'm just going to talk about some of them. Some of the lessons that I've learned from someone that I know really well who's talked to me a lot about it, and that's my dad. He served in the New Hampshire State House of Representatives for quite a number of years, just ending his last term last year. But he didn't start out in politics. In fact, to this day, like many who are very interested in being active in science, he sort of had an aversion to the idea of being called a politician, and he still has an aversion to being called a politician. He started out after his higher education as a science teacher. Are there any science teachers out there? I like to see science teachers. I was a science teacher for a couple years, and I really, really appreciated the time I had to do that and how much effort you guys put into being teachers. How about science, technology, engineering, mathematics teachers, all kinds of teachers? Maybe some history, English teachers? How about anyone who teaches anyone anything in what they do for their work? There's probably a lot of you guys out there, so I'm really glad to see you all here. You all are the lifeblood of science. Much as it surprises me to say it, I'm getting to be an established scientist these days, and that means I spend a lot of my time, for instance, writing about science and editing writing about science, applying principles that were taught to me in a rural high school in New Hampshire about how to structure a paragraph and how to construct an argument. These are the kinds of things that we'd like our politicians to be able to do. They're also the kinds of things we'd like them to be able to consider as important in being a leader and in being someone who we all entrust our futures to. So, can we have some applause for all the teachers in our lives, the people who think critically and reason with sincerity? These are skills, I'm going to argue to the fact that these are skills that it is helpful to have in politics. Now, this is a complex argument, but I think you guys can get a complex argument. So let me start from the beginning. The lesson number one from my dad's experience is that if you don't know where to start local. Okay? My dad ran for the local school board. He registered for the election, he posted an ad in the local paper, and he lost the election. The lesson number two from my dad, you take a hit and you move on. And I think that many of you probably know this is something you might be familiar with if you're engaged in the exercise of science. In science, it's not like the Hollywood depictions where you put A and B together, you get C, and lightning strikes and you manage to make an amazing discovery. In science, what we do most of the time is iterative improvement. We come up with an idea, we test the idea, we use established experimental protocols to do it, and miracle of miracles, it turns out that every other scientist actually is usually right. And there are a lot of hard knocks to us in science as we try idea and find this is not going to work and that's not going to work. And neither are grant proposal panels or journal editors, these people that determine your fate of career as a scientist. All of this gives you a lot of hard knocks, but it teaches you to accept failure as one of the things that happens, and it teaches you to learn from failure, and it teaches you to learn from others who have failed in the past. And all of that knowledge is important in our politics today in telling us what we need to do. So, after his defeat in the school board election, it took my dad a while to find his way back to running an election again. Other things happened. He got swept up in the personal computer revolution in 1982, learned to program computers, started working for a major hospital in the area, crunching hospital healthcare data for decision makers. In those days, computers weren't so common, but anyone here now work with a computer in your work? Is email something that's okay? I think it's probably okay. So that's science. His interest in community meant that as that career developed, he spent more time working on larger questions about healthcare, how healthcare was managed locally and across the state. And as he approached retirement, he started thinking he probably needed to take some of that knowledge that he learned and apply it to the state. And so anytime you're thinking there might be a better way to do what is going on around you, think about how you might be the person to do it. And that might be a first step towards a career that actually helps the way we advance our society. Now, advocates for scientific thinking may not always be successful as politicians. I believe we have one PhD scientist in the US Congress right now, and part of that has to do with the situation of it being necessary to be political to advance your career, and be political is not considered such a great thing to be by scientists. We think of ourselves as rational decision makers, not so much as people who campaign for ourselves, who pander to particular constituencies. And what I want to argue today to you is that if anything needs to improve right now, it's not just what decisions we make, but also the discourse in our politics. And that discourse is something that scientists and people who think scientifically can do very well. That is, what do? They think of what the problem is, and they actively discourse with someone else about how to solve that problem, and when the other person has a better opinion than theirs, they decide to take that route. And that's the kind of discourse we need politically, not just a head-to-head bashing, this is not going to work kind of discourse. And I think all of you are aware of that, and people who understand science understand how to do that. And that was the strength that my dad found he had in the legislature. Now, it's not always the most popular strength to be talking about the caveats and the little details and the whys in the hows, but there is a strength to it that I'm going to tell you about. Part of our political discourse resolves upon the power of anecdote, and many of you have heard this, that the way to get a message across to people is to tell a story or an anecdote, not to give them a bunch of facts. And while that is true, anecdote is pernicious. The problem with anecdote is, if you're willing to base your belief on one story from one supporter who couldn't sell their property after a windmill was erected somewhere, then you're not only basing your belief on insufficient evidence, you're also getting to the point where you might likely to poke at perceived faults in scientific studies because of an anecdotal piece of evidence. So we need people in positions of political power who pay attention to more than anecdotal evidence, who will not replace science with anecdote. So, but you all know that an anecdote or story will do more to move most audiences than a dry statistic, and that there's a lot of horse trading in politics and pandering to constituencies. But I want to tell you there's a quiet power that consistently using scientific thinking and careful reasoning can be to your advantage if you decide to work in the political field, take advances in the political field. So one of my dad's constituents, a guy who lived not too far away in our town, never voted for my dad's party in his entire life. Not one vote. But he voted for my dad. And the reason was because he appreciated that my dad wasn't voting in order to vote on a party line, but he knew and he trusted that my dad would always be thoughtful about making the best decision. And the way he did this was he told everyone. He would write long emails to an email list explaining exactly why he was making every decision, and he would use careful reasoning in doing that. So not only was he making the right decisions, but he was expressing why to all of his constituents. And so the quiet power of being a scientist and a careful reasoner in what you do is that if you communicate why, you may not only affect policy, but you may change opinions of your constituents. It's a two-way street between you and your constituents. You can educate them, they can educate you, and you can both make a difference for our future. In fact, my dad did vote pretty much with his party line all the time. But that didn't matter to this voter because this voter understood why he was voting the way he was. So election year after election year, he was elected with a significant margin, whether the tides of politics swung one way or the other, and they've swung a lot in the last 5 or 6 years. But it's time for you all, and I really mean you all, to take on that torch. His, as I said, his last session was last year, and he's retired from that political office. And I want you all to run for office. Or maybe the best first step might be to volunteer for someone you know. Find someone you know, persuade them to run, and then volunteer to help them run.
Senator Blumenthal!
Excellent. So you should run for office, volunteer to help someone who takes seriously running for office. You don't have to be your image of a politician to run for office. You can be yourself. And you don't have to win every election. You just have to win some of them. So the more of you are there, taking science seriously and making decisions based on evidence, the better our future and the future of our children will be. Get out there and do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Townsend. All right, everybody, it is now my immense pleasure to introduce to you United States Senator from our fine home state of Connecticut, Senator Richard Blumenthal.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Here's a message to Donald Trump. Here's what democracy looks like. So I'm not a scientist, but I want to begin with a few scientific facts. This plaza holds at least 1,200 people. This crowd stretches way back to the stairs. Mr. President, there are more than 1,200 people here today who are saying no to your alternative facts and falsehoods and to your climate denial. Now, we know that history is replete with charlatans who tried to deny or distort or deceive, tried to stifle or suppress scientific fact. And in the end, they failed because the earth is not flat and the sun does not revolve around the earth, and Mr. Trump, the world does not revolve around you. And you may call climate change a hoax. You can remove it as a term from the White House website, but you cannot stop the eroding shorelines, you cannot stop the rising tides, or the melting of the Arctic. You cannot stop us. We will prevail. Science will prevail. Because truth trumps denial. Truth trumps alternative facts. Truth trumps falsehoods. That's something that even the Commander-in-Chief of the United States cannot stop. That's why science and truth will win in the end. And we know it. That's why you're here. Now, the stark fact is that the president is cutting the EPA budget by 30%. He is decimating the NOAA budget. He is cutting $6 billion. $6 billion. Think of this for a moment. From the NIH. That's the agency that is trying to stop cancer, discover cures for Alzheimer's, trying to save people's lives. And the President of the United States is cutting that budget. But I can tell you right now, that budget is dead on arrival in the United States Senate. Because we need science. We need science. Science is the lifeblood of democracy. Science is the way we make advances that enable cleaner cars and cleaner energy and will save the planet. We can save the planet with science and truth because, let me quote to you, Mr. Trump, from one of your heroes, Ronald Reagan, facts are stubborn things. Facts are stubborn things. Facts are the language of science. They ought to be the language of politics instead of the alternative facts and fake news. But science will eventually give us a cure. And that cure is truth. And truth will trump Trump. Thank you. And one last point. I believe in this thing called forensic science. You know, as a prosecutor, I use forensic science often to help to solve crimes, to investigate them, and to prosecute them. And maybe forensic science will prove useful in uncovering Russian meddling in our democracy that may have impacted the election. Or the association between Trump associates and the Russian meddling in our election. And that forensic science will follow scientific evidence and help us vindicate democracy. Your being here has to be more than just a one-off, more than just a one day. We have to continue this energy. We gotta mobilize it and make sure that we translate this passion into positive results, one by one, vote by vote, day by day, and win back democracy and scientific truth for our country. Thank you so much for being here today. Keep fighting, keep working. We will win for science. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal. I'm sure you are so busy, so the fact that you've taken the time out of your day to come here is so appreciated by me, the Planning Committee, and everybody here today. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Allison Galvani. She is director of the Yale Center for Infectious Disease Modeling and Analysis and the Burnett and Stender Family's Professor of Epidemiology at the Yale School of Public Health. Welcome to Dr. Galvani.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to speak today and so heartened to see all of you here showing your support for science. It's undeniable that science has transformed our longevity and prosperity. Within the last century, the discovery of penicillin and the development of many vaccines are among the myriad scientific advances that have extended our life expectancy by decades. Likewise, breakthroughs in engineering have revolutionized our communications, travel, and energy production. Harnessing sustainable solar, geothermal, and wind sources both reduces our ecological impact and improves efficiency. Policies that pave a path backwards to the era of coal mining are as detrimental to the environment and public health as they are precariously short-sighted. Equally short-sighted are indiscriminate travel bans. Science benefits immeasurably from a diversity of backgrounds, experiences, and expertise. The freedom to work with and learn from people all over the world is integral to scientific exchanges that galvanize innovation. Historically, America has been the nexus of these exchanges. On a personal note, my collaborators and colleagues at the Center for Infectious Disease Modeling and Analysis at Yale School of Public Health, the majority of them were not born in America, they were born abroad. They've come from as far as Cameroon, India, Costa Rica, Brazil, Israel, Australia, Japan, Nigeria, China, Poland, Spain, the UK, Liberia, the Philippines, South Africa, Uganda, France, Turkey, Iran, Italy, Canada, Mexico, Portugal, South Korea, Lebanon, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. Some of them are here today. Jorge, Abhishek, raise your hands. Chad, Juan. I feel extraordinarily fortunate to collaborate with these brilliant and hardworking scientists who enrich our research with their own unique perspectives every day. In the U.S., nearly 20% of our scientists are immigrants, and remarkably, all 6 of America's 2016 Nobel Prize winners were immigrants. its doors, the world's brightest scientists will take their talents elsewhere. That would be our loss, and the repercussions would be felt far into the future. The nationalistic worldview motivating these travel bans has been accompanied by a White House budget proposal to abolish NIH global health research and training. Even from a nationalistic perspective, eliminating global health funding would be counterproductive to protecting American security. In our global economy and interconnected world, diseases do not stop at the borders. The unpredictability of disease emergence and reemergence poses a threat to every country across the globe. The U.S. is no exception. An outbreak originating in Mexico may enter the U.S. no matter how high of a wall is built. Appealing to the business sense of our current administration, I would like to underscore the savviness of averting such devastating epidemics as the West African Ebola outbreak by strengthening local public health expertise and preparedness in advance. It is a smart, thank you. It is a smart investment given that the alternative is post hoc emergency response after the situation is already out of control. Supporting global health reduces risk to Americans and saves money in the long run. For those Americans concerned with their own security, global health science should be preserved. For those Americans concerned with the well-being of the entire world, global health science should be preserved. While American scientists have much to offer the global community, we should not underestimate the lessons we can learn from other countries. In Costa Rica, the average income is only $11,000 compared to ours at over $57,000, 5 times higher. Nonetheless, the life expectancy of Costa Ricans has exceeded that of Americans for the past 30 years. Costa Ricans recognize that every dollar allocated to militarization was ultimately the loss of a dollar that could be spent educating their youth and healing their sick. Accordingly, their government redirected military expenditure to education and health with the prioritization on preventing disease before it even happens. And I learned that from Jorge from Costa Rica. By contrast, the underfunding of preventative measures in the UL system leads to a confluence of poor health outcomes and an over-reliance on expensive downstream care. The proposed White House budget would exacerbate our national skew in health priorities by dismantling the Prevention and Public Health Fund, which supports programs that include helping vaccines reach impoverished children, assisting the elderly in the management of chronic pain, and pandemic surveillance. Already the U.S. ranks first internationally for per capita medical spending, but only 31st for life expectancy, and even lower for mental health. In response to rising rates in depression and addiction, Senator Blumenthal, from whom it was inspiring to hear from today, has been working hard for parity and insurance coverage of mental health care. Thank you, Senator Blumenthal. As another example of the low priority given to evidence-based public health initiatives, Congress has rejected expansions of HIV prevention and screening recommended by the Infectious Disease Society of America. Meanwhile, The rates of HIV diagnosis and treatment in the U.S. are far below United Nations targets, below virtually every other developed country, and even below many developing countries, including Rwanda. Specifically, only 52% of people diagnosed with HIV in the U.S. are treated, compared with 91% in France, 92% in Rwanda, and over 99% in Australia, 99.4% in Australia. Similarly, as the Zika pandemic flared, Congress deliberated for 7 months over a relatively modest budget of emergency funding to combat the disease. The heated opposition was counter to scientific evidence demonstrating the health and economic of the proposed bill. At the request of Chuck Schumer's office, our team, including Jorge, our team calculated that based on conservative estimates of lifetime medical costs associated with microcephaly, the proposed bill would be very cost effective. Yet, as deliberations continued, the window of opportunity to mitigate the pandemic closed. Compounding disinvestment in science, the evidence-based recommendations of EPA scientists have recently been unilaterally and decisively disregarded. Just a few weeks ago, the new EPA had overturned recommendations by scientists in his own agency to ban a toxic pesticide shown to inhibit the cognitive development of children. It's a pesticide that's already been banned in Europe and Canada. I suspect that this decision was influenced by the fact that this neurotoxic pesticide is produced by the Dow Chemical Company, which was among the most generous donors to Trump's inaugural fund. The apparent willingness of our corporate and government leaders to jeopardize the well-being of our children is profoundly unsettling. Nothing is more important than the health and safety of our children.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your words, Dr. Galvani and company. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, who is Sarah Bronin, University of Connecticut law professor and chair of Hartford's Climate Stewardship Council.
Wow. All right, I'm short here. I mean, is this better? Can you see me better now? Okay. So it's my pleasure to welcome you guys here to the city of Hartford. As you might know, my husband is the mayor here, and he's sorry he couldn't be with us today. He's actually meeting with a group of similarly progressive-minded mayors and trying to figure out what kind of brave new world they've all ended up in. And what a world it is. It's really extraordinary that today we actually have to come out and say, join forces together and say science, not silence. The fact that we have to come here, all of you are here, is, as I said, extraordinary. Our founding fathers built this nation on the basis of science and reason. So you have Thomas Jefferson quoted as saying, "Freedom is the firstborn daughter of science." Today we're saddled with a federal administration with a blatant disregard for science, for reason, for fact. And we really have no choice but to defy this point of view today. For today, we do that from the bottom up. If Washington won't lead, then Connecticut will lead. And Hartford will lead. So I know a lot of the speakers speakers have talked about action at the federal level, but it's my personal view that a lot of the climate action that's going to be taking place over the next, let's say 4 years, 3 years and 8 months or whatever, is going to be taking place at the local level. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how Hartford's a great example of that, and how you can take some of the stuff we've been doing here into your own communities to be active at the local level. So here in Hartford, we've committed ourselves to be a positive driver of environmental change. We've started from the ground up, from the community up, a climate stewardship initiative that's engaged about 24 stakeholder organizations along with countless citizens in an effort to comprehensively address our challenges in the areas of energy, water, transportation, waste, food, and green space. Should know that. We're right here in a park. Our goals in this effort are threefold. We want to achieve environmental justice. We want to also achieve economic development, which, as many of you know, is often a challenge here in Hartford. And we also want to achieve public health. At the same time, we want to be a national leader in sustainability initiatives. As part of that effort, over the last year or so that we've been convening, we've drafted the city's first ever climate action plan. We've secured grant funding for a full-time sustainability coordinator and green infrastructure coordinator. And I should say the sustainability coordinator is here today, sitting in the front row. Welcome. We've revamped our zoning code to be one of the most sustainable in the country. We have everything in that code, from electric vehicle charging stations to solar on roofs to expansion of green space to low impact development features. All right, so let me just, full disclosure, I'm a zoning law professor. I could go on and on about that. I won't, but just know that we've accomplished a lot here. I wanted to note that we've accomplished a lot of that in part through the effective partnership with educational institutions in our area. So I'm a professor at UConn. We've had a lot of UConn students coming through and professors helping us. Same with Trinity College, same with the University of Hartford. And it's now more than ever that we need those partnerships, the political partnerships with educational institutions who can bring data to help local institutions and states as well make decisions based on facts. I guess it's a novel concept. But it's important for all of us as we fight for science to also fight for the full funding and vibrancy of our educational institutions. It's so important. Without that, none of us would be here. Dr. Galvani, none of us would be here standing on these shoulders. So as I mentioned, I work at UConn. I run our Center for Energy and Environmental Law, and yesterday we had a conference with about 200 people. The keynote speaker was Michael Mann. Many of you have probably read some of his books. He's a noted climatologist that has been attacked for his research and the conclusions that he's drawn from that research, namely that climate change is real and that it is man-made. Despite the attacks that he has endured and the political realities that he and we all face, Dr. Mann was really optimistic. Maybe you want to... I got a bear here. So Dr. Galvani's children were so nicely behaved and dressed, but I got bears here in Hartford. Roar. Right, guys? All right. So where was I? So despite everything that he faces and the knowledge that he has, he had hope that the progress we're making can't and won't be tossed aside. As you know, we have reason to hope right behind us. This beautiful river, a natural asset that would make any city envious 50 years ago, was unrecognizable. After a century of industrial abuse, it was overflowing with sewage and waste. It was an environmental disaster. In the 1960s, Katharine Hepburn, a Connecticut resident, narrated a documentary in which she called this river the world's most beautifully landscaped cesspool. Now it's a lot cleaner. It's one of the most beautiful rivers in the country, even. And in fact, it was named a few years ago the nation's first blueway. It's once again vibrant and thriving, teeming with animal life, and a place of community gathering and recreation. The revival of the Connecticut River is a perfect example of what can be accomplished with when responsible and scientifically informed policymaking dovetails with grassroots community activism. And I should call out in particular in that regard Riverfront Recapture, whose hospitality we're all enjoying today, and who played a critical role in those conservation efforts. Continuing this activism is fundamental. The greatest challenge we face as a society today is the protection of our environment. It depends more than anything on you and others like you gathered across the country today and actually around the world. Citizens from every walk of life, non-scientists and scientists, must continue to hold our politicians accountable and demand that policy decisions be based in science and reason. We can't stop after today. So the question I would hope you ask yourself is, again, what type of legacy will we leave behind for the next generation? As a mother, I want to encourage you to work at every level, but including and maybe especially the local level, as we continue this fight and advocate for a better future. Thank you very much.
It is now my pleasure to introduce our penultimate speaker today, Mary Sotos, who is the Deputy Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection.
Thank you. Greetings, fellow scientists. These aren't the type of posters we're used to standing by, are they? On the one hand, the scientific method is beautifully nonpartisan. But of course, the way we choose to fund and conduct scientific research and use it or not use it in public and private decision making is deeply political. So we shouldn't think that science can just speak for itself. It can't. We need to fight for it. I'm excited to stand up here today for science with a capital S and the specific ways that it has and should continue to drive environmental choices that protect the health and well-being of people and the planet. So what are those specific ways? Some of you may remember when raw sewage and industrial pollution poured into the Connecticut River, or when air pollution, much of it from cars, created a dense smog that hung over Hartford and the Connecticut River Valley. You didn't need to be a trained scientist to know that something wasn't right, and that we and our communities deserved a better environment and better health. But why and how did those things change? 3 things: science, political engagement, and policy. Science helps us observe, study, diagnose, establish metrics. We map watersheds, we test air, we test water quality, we detect new threats that aren't visible. Political engagement, that's you here marching, demanding change at the local, state, federal, and international level. And finally, it's policy. Regulation is not a dirty word. In fact, it's the only thing that has managed to clean things up. Now, of course, there are better and worse ways to regulate. And as a policymaker, I and my team, we want to engage all of you, citizens, businesses, homeowners. We want to understand what the best ways are to do environmental policy here in Connecticut. We want to understand who's affected, who's bearing the cost, who's most vulnerable. That's where you come in and you help us. But scientific information has to be the foundation of our decision making. Anything less would be unfair to you, unfair and inefficient to the environment, and ultimately ineffective. We can't get things done without science. So, a final note here on climate change. Few other environmental issues have managed to have their core science so politicized. And as scientists, we should take a moment to examine that, even though it's infuriating. So why is that? The preponderance of scientific evidence is clear. We're experiencing significant changes in our climate. We know it's accelerated by human activities, and we see the impacts right here in Connecticut. Summers are hotter. The waters of Long Island Sound are rising and getting warmer. Fish populations are changing. We're living in drought conditions, more forest fires, and an increasing number of invasive species. But I think we know what it comes down to. It comes down to fear, and it comes down to politics. Surely part of the reason that these changes are questioned or resisted is because they're scary. It's overwhelming. We wish the evidence weren't true. But science requires us to be brave. We have to confront the truth, and we have to use our heads as much as our hearts. And on politics, for many people, the solutions to this problem can seem too big a change to our life, to society as we know it, too big of a change to the status quo. But removing the words climate change from websites, cutting funding to research it, resisting the science, denying the problem because the solution is too hard, that might seem like a short-term political win, but the problem is not going away. But neither are we. Here in Connecticut and in my organization, the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, we're not backing down. We talk about climate change. We live, breathe, think, strategize. We're tackling it. We're serious about it. We're making solutions happen. We're trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're changing our electricity to be more low carbon and renewable. We're being more efficient. We're helping you insulate your homes. We're shifting our transportation to low carbon fuel stocks. That means electric vehicles, hydro vehicles, everything else. Helping to sequester and retain carbon in our soils and trees. Adapting and planning for change like grown-ups. Making our state safer and more resilient. And luckily for us, all of those solutions have co-benefits. They make our life better. They create jobs. They create prosperity. They make Connecticut a competitive player in the U.S. and in the world. And I should note, as policymakers, we're also rigorous about evaluating our programs to see what's working and what's not working. That's called evidence-based policymaking. So thank you for being here today, and I hope you'll join me in upholding, protecting, and using the most important tool we have. Science is humble, science is brave, and science will win.
And now, last but not least, one of our speakers could not join us today. Anybody who was listening on NPR yesterday heard that he had an unexpected medical situation. However, he was so gracious as to write some words for us that Sarah Raskin is going to read for us. These are written by Gary Yo, who's Huffington Foundation Professor of Economics and Environmental Studies, and also received a share of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize. So Sarah?
So here are the remarks of Dr. Yo. I am sorry that I cannot be with you all this afternoon. I was so looking forward to celebrating science with you. I wanted to publicly put my name alongside those who are making it clear in Hartford, around the nation, and across the globe that science is an essential part of our lives that cannot be ignored. Our collective recognition and understanding of science may play an even more important role in determining what we will leave behind for those who follow us on this blue marble. I want to make two simple points. When I speak of science and its importance, I speak of all science. The biological and physical sciences, engineering science, medical science, political science, economics, sociology, psychology, epidemiology, public health, chemistry, climate science, atmospheric chemistry, statistics, decision science, and so on. These and many other areas of scientific endeavor are all under the umbrella of disciplines whose products illuminate how the planet works and how its inhabitants work. They can even explain why some among us might want to dismiss science and the insights drawn from science. What would happen if the science cynics were to win the minds of a majority of people? What would happen if they systematically eliminated science in society? By deliberately sowing seeds of doubt with false and pointedly fabricated statements that undermine rigorously supported scientific facts? By creating a culture wherein personal and dangerous attacks on scientists are encouraged? By defunding the institutions that support the expansion of scientific knowledge in areas with the greatest public value? The easy answers to this question are many. Humans would never go to Mars. Pollution would return to the Connecticut River. A new therapy for a debilitating disease would never be discovered. A community would not protect itself from the exaggerated risks presented by the increasing intensity and frequency of extreme weather events. Hospitals and public health institutions would not prepare themselves for unseen but foreseeable onslaughts of deadly pandemics. The Defense Department would not be prepared for outbreaks of violence that cannot be foreseen without taking account of global climate change. The easy answers are specific and they are true, but they miss a broader point. So let's go to the heart of defunding science across the federal government. Let's recognize that the Environmental Protection Agency is really a public health agency. Let's acknowledge that NASA's defunded mission to planet Earth is really a mission to understand how the planet that sustains us so well can turn so violently against us from time to time. Let's assert that the fundamental science conducted by the National Institutes of Health reveals how we live, how we die, so that we can do more of the former and delay the latter. The fundamental answer to what would happen if science were dismissed is my second point, and it is only 4 words. The answer is people will die unnecessarily. We cannot say specifically who, or when, or where, or how they will die, but we can say that it will happen, and it will happen many times over. We can even describe who would be most vulnerable from the demise of science, and that is the poor living near a coastline in an area prone to multiple disease vectors. So please, go out today and celebrate science. Make some new friends. Network. Recommit to doing all that you can do to stop people who would take science away. Get involved. Run for office. Study hard. Learn how to communicate science. Learn some statistics. Learn to communicate statistics. Learn how the opposition thinks and how they behave. Watch Fox News. And then be a guest on Hannity. Never forget that 2 + 2 is 4. And finally, in all that you do to support science, get loud. Your children, your state, your country, and your planet are all depending on you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Sarah, for reading those words, and thank you to Gary Yo for writing them and sending them in to us. We wish you could be here with us. I couldn't possibly say anything more appropriate than the words that Sarah and Gary just delivered to us, but I think that Gary really hit the head on the nail on the head with what we were trying to accomplish here today. We really hope that you take with you these new connections and a passion for continued activism and to defend science the way that you always have, but to now just go a little bit further. Attend future marches and events like this. Sign up to be on our listserv so that you can remain informed after today on ways you can continue to be involved. Contact your representatives in government. Lobby, or maybe even run for office. I promise you that this is not the last that you've heard from us. We will be reaching out very soon to let you know how you can make a difference moving forward. There's plenty more for you to do here today. You can network with one another, show off your signs, chant, get loud. That guy's got it. We have a wonderful line of exhibits here, organizations from around Connecticut who are here to show their enthusiasm and to give you information on things that you can do in your area. We also have a wonderful science fair of young inventors and engineers from STEM programs in the greater Hartford area, and you can go see some of the things they've brought with them. The Connecticut Science Center has their own event going on today as well, and you can of course enjoy everything that downtown Hartford has to offer. Thank you everybody for coming out today. Please, if you can. Thank you. Please, if you can. Yes. Also, don't forget that next weekend on April 29th, if I'm correct, is the Climate March in DC, another very important event that you should consider going to as well. And please, if you can, do your small part in protecting our environment here and pick up any trash that you see around you. We are responsible for cleaning this place up after this event, so anything you can do will help. Get home safe, enjoy the rest of your day here, and always remember that science matters. Thank you.